Hello fellow makeup lovers, how are you guys doing today? We are going to go ahead and do a dupe of the Natasha Denona Pastel Palette. I went through my entire single shadow collection and tried to dupe this palette to the best of my abilities, and honestly, not to toot my own horn, mostly I'm tooting the horn of indie brands, but I feel like my dupe is honestly so much better quality wise. Recently, I purchased this palette, I tested it out, I did multiple looks on my channel, I did a full review, and at the end of the day, my thoughts were that it's a really pretty palette, but it's just not worth $65, and if I had that money to splurge on pastels, it wouldn't be towards this palette. I do have some other palette recommendations if you'd like to see me do a video on like other pastel palettes that I'd recommend over this one, just let me know. But today I thought I'd go ahead and start off with my single shadows. So I'll show you them side by side. This is just being kept in a little empty magnetic palette from Terra Moons, but here is what they look like. So, I mean, I feel like I got most of the shadows pretty spot on, and honestly, all the shimmers in this palette put the Natasha Denona palette to shame. You guys will see. We're gonna go ahead and do side-by-side swatches of every single shade, and if you like this eye look, I did do it with my dupe palette on my Patreon, so that should be live soon. Before we jump in, I did just wanna say, if you're new here, I'm so happy to have you. My name's Amy. I do a ton of content around independently owned makeup brands. I love talking about smaller brands. You'll see so many cool brands just through this palette alone. So if you want to see more content like this on your subscription feed, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now let's jump on in. So the first shadow we have in the palette is called Tulle, and it's a really nice light pink shade. It's a little bit more muted than the dupe that I ended up finding. Tulle is actually one of the shades I really like in the Natasha Denona palette. I feel like it blends really nice, had no problem with patchiness. I thought it worked as a really nice blush as well, but I went ahead and ended up doing this pink right here, which is called Palm Reader from Terra Moons, which also is an amazing pastel formula. My favorite pastel single shadows are from Terra Moons, so you can see this one is just a touch brighter, but I feel like overall very similar vibes. Okay, I actually swatched out. This one looks way more pigmented, but the shades are very, very close. I'll just build this up a little bit more so you can see. If you use this lightly, then it looks like that. Okay, so this next shade is called Illusion, and I just have a little bone to pick with this shadow because in the product photos, it looks like it's like this shift from like pink to orange, and I think there might be like a little bit of gold as well. And literally that is so exaggerated. I feel like that is just false marketing because that is not what the shade looks like at all. There is barely any shift. On the eye, you can only see pink. So yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's kind of unimpressive. Like you have to dig in to get pigment. Like it's okay, but it's just not what I would expect from Natasha Denona. So this shade that I decided to dupe it with is from Divina, and it is like, I feel like it is the shadow that it looked like the Natasha Denona one was in the product photos. It has a beautiful pink, orange, yellow shift, and it is so sparkly, so stunning. This is the shade Aylin. It's what I have on my inner corner, so it does have that decent like pink shift to it, but the intensity, I mean, you can see they look like the same color, but the Divina formula is so much better. Alrighty. So there's Natasha Denona, and there is Divina. Like, look at that. That is what I want out of a shadow. So hopefully, I mean, obviously, if you guys went through and duped every single shade in the Natasha Denona palette and followed mine, it would be very expensive. But if there were any shades in here that you were looking at and wanting to pick one or two, or just pick a few, or you just wanted like this kind of vibe but better quality, hopefully this video is helpful for you. But anyways, next we have the shade Mint Frost, which is a decent shade. It's like a really pretty kind of like mid-tone shimmer. It's nothing super special, but it's also not the worst shade in that palette. So I went ahead and duped that with a shade from Sydney Grace, which is called Mint Green. So I would say these two are very similar formula wise. This is the Sydney Grace one here. They're both like more just like foiled shadows, not super sparkly. And I mean, shade wise, I feel like they look super close. So we've got Natasha Denona and Sydney Grace. Sydney Grace might be just a tiny bit lighter, but I think they would look the same on the eye. So next we have the shade Bora, And I think that might be the worst shade in this entire palette. I think it's supposed to be like the cream to powder finish, which I do like in other shadows, but that shade just comes off so unpigmented on the eyes. It's not easy to work with. And I was kind of like a little bit torn on what to do with duping it because, I mean, you can see the dupe looks very different from the one in the palette, but I decided to dupe the shade that it is when you swatch it out versus just duping what it looks like in the palette, because it looks dark, it looks rich, it looks like such a pretty purple, but that is not what you get out of this shade. So I'll just go ahead and show you guys, like, this is me digging my finger in, and oh, I actually got a little bit out of that. That was better than what I expected, but you'll see when I swatch it, it's very, very light. And then I went ahead, this is not perfect. Like I said, I was trying my best with this shade, but I have this like light kind of like mauve-y purple. This is called Miraki from Davina. And this one actually comes off a little bit darker when you swatch it than how it looks in the pan, but I'll show you them side by side. So here's the Natasha Denona. Like I said, you can see just super, super pale. And there is the Davina. So I felt like swatched out, they were kind of similar vibes, but I like the formula of the Davina matte way more. So yeah, that one was a little bit of a weird one. Next, we have another shade that I did really enjoy from the pastel palette. This is the shade Dainty, and it's just a really pretty, like, soft pink. This one is foiled. It has like a little bit of sparkle to it. I thought this one was actually really nice. One of the best shades in the palette again. So I went ahead and duped that with a shade from Touch of Glam. This is Seduce Me, which is also like a really beautiful soft foiled pink. And I mean, you can see they look nearly identical. So there's Natasha Denona, and there is Touch of Glam. So I guess swatched out Touch of Glam looks a little bit more pink, and then Natasha Denona looks a little bit more purple. But I mean, again, like, I feel like on the eyes, they look so similar. So on to the second row. Next we have this mint shade, which is called Brisk, and this is another one of the shades that like has like a decent formula to it. Swatched out, it does have a little bit of fallout, but I feel like on the eye, like, it does look decently pigmented, and it's like a nice mint matte. So the shade I duped that out with is Terra Moon's Lunar or Later. Like I said, Terra Moon's has such a good pastel formula. I feel like Lunar or Later has just a touch more blue to it, but I didn't have an exact dupe for the Natasha Denona. But again, those are very similar. We have the shade Adriatic, and this one is okay. It's another foiled shadow. It's pretty, it has pigment to it, it works, but it's just nothing like super special. So I went ahead and I have a shade that's very similar, but I feel like formula wise it's way prettier. So this is from Davina. It is the shade Draco. Shadow is a little bit more sparkly. It has a little shift to it. I mean, they're not exactly the same, but I just wanted to do something a little bit more special because I felt like Adriatic was kind of boring. So there's what those two look like next to one another. Like, I mean, the shades look very similar, like color-wise. This just looks so much more intense. Okay, I think I'm gonna do one more shade and then we'll wipe off these swatches so that we can keep going. So now we have the shade Starlet. This one took me by surprise because I don't love the way it looks in the palette, but it's actually a decent shade. Has like a little bit of sparkle to it. It has a decent amount of pigmentation, and it's nice. So I feel like in the palette it looks more orangey, but swatched out it has like a little bit more pinkness to it. I feel like it looks pink on the eyes. So I tried to find something similar. This one is a little bit more intense, a little bit more shifty. It's Terra Moon's Antaris. It has a little bit more going with it. I mean, you'll see the foiledness of it is beautiful. So you can see it has a bit more of a shift to it, but then the bases are pretty similar. The Terra Moon's looks a little bit more pink, but I'm telling you, this shade pulls more pink on the eyes. So there's Natasha Denona, and there's Terra Moon's. I mean, that one's just so much prettier. I took some artistic liberties here. All right, so there is the first half of the palette up close. Okay, next we have the shade Bellini, which I did like this one as well. It's just a really nice kind of soft peach pastel shade. And the thing is, I feel like I don't have that many basic single shadows, so I was struggling to dupe a peach shade. So I ended up with something that's like a little tiny bit more orange, but I did the best that I could. So this is the shade Issues. I want to say that this is actually from ColourPop, and I mean, there's what they look like together, like not too far off, but I don't think that this shade is even available anymore. So I mean, I feel like that's one that I would have an easier time duping out from an eyeshadow palette versus from a single shadow, but there's the two peaches. Next we have the shade Bubble, which is kind of like a periwinkle, cornflower kind of blue, like somewhere in the middle there. It's funny because these two blues look so different in the pan, but kind of like the two purples here, when you put them on the eyes, they look very similar because this shade just ends up being a little bit lighter than what you would expect. So there's what that looks like. I mean, it is a pretty color, but it's just not the easiest formula ever to work with. So I have a like really pretty kind of cornflower blue from Lethal right here. This one is called Altitude. Definitely prefer the formula of the Lethal matte, but there's what they look like next to one another. So there's Natasha Denona and there's Lethal. Those actually are swatching so similar. I'm going to do a little bit more of Lethal just because I feel like that one builds a little bit more. Next we have this yellow, which is called Limoncello. This is an okay shade. I think that it's a really pretty color, and I'm glad that it wasn't included in the palette. I just wish that the formula was done a little bit better. I feel like the only way to get pigmentation out of it is to use a very, very dense brush, but even using your finger with this shade is just not the best. Like I feel like it goes on kind of patchy, it doesn't look smooth. Like I just feel like it could have been done a lot better. So I have a really nice yellow that's very similar in tone, but that has a little bit more impact to it. This is the Chickee Trefoil from Menagerie. So I just picked up a tiny little bit of that, but you can see kind of same yellow vibes, but the trefoil is so much more impactful. So there's Natasha Denona and Menagerie. I mean, so pretty. Okay, next we have the shade Duet, which is kind of like a purpley pink with a blue shift. And I do like this one. I don't hate it, but I just remember like immediately from the first time I swatched it thinking like I have similar things like this from other brands that have been done better. Like it's a pretty shadow, but it's just kind of foiled. I wish it had like some sparkles or something to it. It's just, I feel like it could be a little bit more, but either way, I went ahead and duped that out with another shadow from Divina. This one is absolutely stunning. This is the shade Creampuff Cuddles, and it's basically the same exact idea. It's a pinky purple with a blue shift, but it is so much more intense. I mean, you can see same color story, but this one's just delicious. So there's Natasha Denona and Divina. Next we have kind of a true pastel matte blue. This one is called Airy. This one I felt like, even though it's pretty, it did end up going a little bit patchy on me in some looks. It wasn't my favorite formula. So that one is also from Terra Moons. It is the shade Daydreamer. But those two look like next to one another. Daydreamer is definitely a little bit lighter. But honestly, I feel like the formula is so much better that you'd have better luck with Daydreamer. Let me try and build that up too, just to be fair. Okay, next we have this green right here, which is called Zest, and it's an okay shade. I feel like it is probably the most powdery pastel in this palette, but I do like a good greeny yellow moment, so I went ahead and duped that out with a shade from Lethal. So this one is called Relapse, and it's the same kind of vibe, like that greeny yellow. I feel like the Natasha Denona one is maybe just slightly more pastel, but again, I feel like on the eyes, they look very similar. And then last but not least, we have this nice light purple, which is called Feather. This one, again, I liked. I didn't have any issues with. And I duped that out with the shade Ascension from Terra Moons. So Ascension is a little bit more pastel. It has a little bit less mauve. That's one that I actually do really like, that I wish I could have duped it a little bit closer, but I didn't quite have a pastel that had that mauviness to it. So I liked that that one ended up being a little bit more unique, even though that was a terrible swatch. Hold on a second. Okay. There we go. So I feel like the first set, it was like a little bit more close in this set, but still all of these will give the same exact vibe on the eyes. So here's another look up close. Alright y'all, so those are all of my dupes for the Natasha Denona Pastel Palette. I hope that this video was helpful for you, especially if you were just looking for a few shades that you wanted to dupe out of here. It was actually really nice going through and duping a palette and actually already owning it, because I've done dupes for palettes in the past just looking at pictures. So to be able to swatch and compare and try to get as close as I possibly could was really, really fun. So I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you'd like to see more content like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.